time on the postnatal ward has been varied, to say the least. In terms of the positives and negatives of the care that I've received on the postnatal ward, it depends very much on which pregnancy you're talking. All 3 pregnancies ended in a caesarean section. 2 of those were an emergency caesarean and 1 of them was planned. With my first pregnancy, I remember feeling really overwhelmed. I'd been in labour for 26 hours, had an emergency caesarean, was in recovery for a bit with Dave, and then moved to this really busy postnatal ward at about 7 o'clock in the morning, at which point I was basically told, it's not visiting hours now, your husband has to leave. And I'm like, I've just given birth for the first time. I've been in labour for God knows how long, and someone's just cut me open, and I've got this tiny little person who I've got to look after, and you're sending my husband home. So I can't remember what time he came back at. I don't think it was a really, really long time, but it felt it. And I remember just feeling really helpless because I was kind of holding Ben, and then I had to put him down because I was really tired. And then when he was crying, I had to ring the buzzer to get somebody to come and pick him up because I couldn't sit myself up because it was I was in too much pain. And I was kind of made to feel like that was a bit of a hassle. And then later on in the same day, when my mum had come to visit, she'd driven from York to Manchester to come and visit her newborn grandson. And right in the middle of visiting hours, this really very stern midwife came and told me that my visitors would have to leave because she was going to get me up out of bed, my catheter was going to be removed, and I needed to get in the shower. This was like 12 hours after my surgery. And I just didn't want to. And she was really brusque, and I really didn't like it. I actually stayed on that ward for quite a few days, and in the end I realised that although she was quite brusque, she did have our best interests at heart, because, you know, when people were kind of overstaying their welcome during visiting hours or being a bit noisy, she did sort them out, and I did grow to quite like her. But in those first hours after I'd had my firstborn, it was miserable. The second 2 were quite different. With Chloe, do you know, I don't really remember much of my postnatal experience with Chloe. It was on the same ward, so it was a really long, old-fashioned maternity ward with just bed after bed after bed after bed, and it was noisy. But yeah, I don't really remember. With Amy, it was very different because North Manchester had a new maternity unit built, so we were in wards of 6. There were only 3 of us actually in the ward when I had Amy. The woman next to me was really loud, and she was one of these, you know, on the phone in the middle of the night when you're like, you know, I'm trying to sleep, got a newborn, I'm really hot and sweaty, this is unpleasant. But my care, the people who were looking after me were great. You know, they took the babies off when I needed to sleep. I think my postnatal care after Amy was probably the nicest. I was left with my catheter in for longer. I was able to rest for longer before I was kind of forced up and into the shower. I was allowed a full night's sleep first, which it all just seemed much steadier and much more gentle. And then once I was off the ward and at home, my postnatal care carried on for a really long time because I had a lot of problems with my blood pressure and things. And the midwives, rather than just signing me off and leaving me to it, they kept coming and coming and coming right up until quite a long time after you would have normally been signed off. And they were so lovely. They used to just come and sit and chat to me. And I think because I knew them really well, because I'd seen them a lot when I was pregnant, and because this was my 3rd baby and it was the same local midwives. So in that sense, I suppose my postnatal care for Amy was probably my favourite. I don't have any massive complaints about any of them. I was well looked after. But yeah, definitely Amy's was my favourite. So I've been given some comments from Mumsnetters. One says, many were sometimes unable to access food or pain relief or get attention from staff when they needed it. I had no problems getting fed, except for the fact that when you've had a caesarean, you're not actually allowed to eat immediately. So when everyone talks about that amazing first cup of tea and toast, you can't have that after a C-section. You have to let everything settle down. And I just remember each time being absolutely starving because you've been nil by mouth for ages, and then you still can't eat. So, but that was not the fault of the midwives, that's just the surgery. And pain relief was an issue with Amy, but again, it wasn't the postnatal care as such as the fact that the medication that I'd had with the first two, diclofenac, was no longer allowed. And they wouldn't give me ibuprofen because of my asthma. And I really didn't want any more morphine. All I wanted was the diclofenac because I knew it would help, but they wouldn't. There was something to do with heart problems, I think. So after my C-section with Amy, after the initial morphine doses, I basically survived on paracetamol until I got home, where I gave myself ibuprofen because I know my asthma well enough, I suppose. So yes, I did have big problems with pain relief after Amy, but I don't think that's a lack of resources or the midwives. They tried. It was the doctors who wouldn't give it to me. Some described the ward as too noisy, meaning they barely slept, too hot, or too overcrowded. Overcrowding, I never suffered with. That was fine. I mean, yes, the ward for the first two was, like I say, a really long, old-fashioned ward, and the spaces were quite small, but it didn't really matter. It was a much more pleasant experience with Amy because there was only 6 of us in separate rooms, and that was fine. Too hot, that's more the plastic sheets on the bed than anything else. So, and yeah, but not being able to sleep was really hard because, you know, just people using their phone at really inappropriate times. Babies cry, that's fine, you know, if you're going to be kept awake by a baby, that's okay, as long as someone's trying to do something about it. But just people just not having any self-awareness and being really noisy and chatting really loudly and kind of not really realising that there are other new mums in the room, that was always quite difficult. Obviously, the dream solution in that situation would be for us all to have our own little bedrooms. I know after I had Ben, I was quite poorly and had to be readmitted to the postnatal ward, and at that point I was given my own room because I was there for about 5 days, and it was miserable. I wanted to be at home with my baby, and my husband, and not be stuck back in hospital with him. So yeah, I did have my own room then, and it was available for, you know, for the people who really needed it, but or for the people who paid for it. You could actually book that room. A percentage felt unable to look after their baby on their own and were not helped to do so by staff. Some were frightened for their own or their baby's well-being. I can't say I experienced that at all. The times when I was really struggling, the midwife, because I was really tired, the midwives would take the baby, which happened with all of them, take them off and, you know, cuddle them and settle them for me just so that I could get a little bit of sleep. Again, I would say that probably my experience with Amy, my youngest, was probably my best with that. And they used to take her off for a couple of hours, and then when she was really settled, they'd put her back down in bed next to me. And yeah, I definitely didn't have a problem with that, to be honest. What one change would you like to see, and why is it so important? I would like to see more stability in your maternity care. I was really lucky that with all 3 children, for my antenatal care, I had the same midwife. Occasionally I would see somebody else, but I had the same midwife in the community, and she was amazing. And she was also the person who came and did my postnatal care at home, but there's not really any continuity between that and what's going on in hospital. And I know some people who literally had a different midwife every single time they went for checkups, and there's no, like for me, I had some complications in pregnancy, and having to retell your story every time you saw somebody, every consultant that I met, every doctor that I met, every midwife that I met, yes, this is what happens and this is why, and yeah, it's really tedious. So I think if there was more continuity in care throughout the experience, then that would help people to get to know people better and feel more settled and more safe, and yeah, just feel that people knew what was going on, I think. I would love you to share this video in support of the Mumsnet campaign for better postnatal care, aftercare, not an afterthought. I know that my experiences have been quite positive, and not everyone has been so lucky.